Hi everyone, and welcome to the second video cast of of our personality unit. We're going to continue with talking about Freud today and some of his students or followers or people who took some of his ideas. They're called neofreudians. All right. I know you all are very sad. You're missing my little face in the corner today, but I was having some tech issues and I wanted to get this out as soon as possible, so we'll have to make do. All right. We already talked about this a little bit in class today when we were discussing id, ego, superego, and defense mechanisms. But more specifically, I wanted to talk about how Freud thought your personality developed. So Freud believed that all adults had id, ego, superegos, but the way that your id, ego, superego developed, we talked about the fact that your parents had to do with it. Well, he's a little bit more specific than just saying your parents were involved, right? He's actually so specific in that he came up with stages that happened along the way where your parents would be involved. They're called the 5 psychosexual stages. And they're called psychosexual because they involve sexual urges, right? Each stage holds a conflict. It's usually a sexual conflict that has to be resolved before the child can move on, or they'll get stuck there and have problems in the future, right? So that's what called fixation is getting stuck in a stage, and you might continue on to the next stage, but you always have problems in this stage, never really move on. And he believed that a lot of your personality was almost fully developed by the age of 6, and that definitely by the time you're a teenager, it's pretty much done. Okay, so the first stage is the oral stage. The second stage is anal, phallic, latency, genital. Okay, so at each stage, libido. At each stage, you have a libido. Libido is like your sex drive. It's your sexual urges and instincts. So Freud believed that at the oral stage, the libido was focused or centered in the mouth. Okay, now I know that this sounds kind of silly, but really what he believed is that children derived pleasure like you would sexual pleasure, but not, kind of in that way, like a version of that, from feeding, right? So that was the task that a child had to be successful at in the oral stage. He had to learn to properly feed and get his needs met through feeding, okay, breastfeeding, bottle feeding, whatever it was. Now, if you either had too much or too little. So this is where you get what's called an oral fixation, right? We've heard that term maybe in like pop psych, you hear it like thrown around. Someone who's an oral fixation is someone who's always like biting their nails, biting on pen caps, whatever, right? And this is because Freud believed that if you somehow either got fed too much or not enough, there was an issue with your feeding, then you might develop an oral fixation where you're continually trying to work out this sexual energy in your mouth that you weren't able to properly address in the oral stage. All right, so then the next stage is the anal stage, right? And of course, we all think it's very funny, right, that the idea that your sexual, your libido, your sexual energy was then transferred from, it went from the mouth to the anal stage, which was in your anus, right? But Freud really believed here that the task was potty training and that children derived pleasure from the idea of being able to go and control their bowel movements, right? That it was like a task that they felt pleasure doing. It made them happy and excited to be able to have control over their bodies. Now, you could get stuck here. So either your parents tried to force you to be potty trained, right? And you weren't ready, you didn't want to be potty trained, and they stuck you in the toilet and said, you're not leaving until you're potty trained, right? And you weren't ready. Or they never made you potty trained, and you were kind of allowed to do whatever you wanted, and maybe you had diapers on until you were 4 or 5 or whatever, right? They didn't really ever take the time to do it. So this kind of develops into 2 types of fixations. There's anal retentive, which is where you become very, very neat and organized, right? And then anal expulsive. And this is the idea really of what it is, right? Anal retentive is that you refuse to go to the bathroom. So your parents try to force you, make you, and you're like, no, I'm not going potty, right? And you can control that. You become really neat and controlling and kind of a control freak, right? And then anal expulsive is the opposite of that, right? So just going wherever you wanted to, not using the toilet, doing whatever, and being messy, right? As an adult, you like have your stuff everywhere and never know where anything is. All right, next stage is the phallic stage. And for Freud, this was one of the most important stages because this is where you developed your sexual identity. Okay, the libido here is now in the place where you and I come to think of our sexual energy, which is in our genitals. Even though we talked a lot about how the main sex organ is actually your brain, right? But in terms of, what most people think of, they think of sexual energy or sex drive in the libido, in the genitals. So the task here is to form your sexual identity. And what can happen is that as you develop your sexual identity, you have to go through the Oedipal or Electra complex. So if you're a boy, you fall in love with your mom, right? But then your dad has your mom, right? Because they're married. So then you learn to identify and kind of mimic your dad to get your mom's attention. And that's how you learn to become a boy, right? That's how you learn your sexual identity. You match your dad to get the attention of your mom. Just the opposite for girls, Electra. You're in love with your dad, so you match your mom because your mom has your dad, right? Then you learn how to be a girl. Well, of course, Freud didn't always believe this happened very easily, so you might get stuck in the Oedipal or Electra complex and develop various issues if you didn't learn to identify with the proper parent and struggle with sexual relationships your whole life. Also, he believed that little boys had something called castration anxiety, where literally you learned or you were afraid of that your dad would learn that you were like attracted to your mom and come and cut off your penis, right? And for girls, he thought that girls always had, and sorry, this shouldn't say womb envy, this should say penis envy. So womb envy is, I'm going to talk about in a minute. So he thought all girls had penis envy, and they were jealous that their dad had a penis and that they could never have one, and so they would never get over it, basically. Okay, latency. This is where, little boys and girls talk about, okay, you have cooties and whatever. Like, we only want to play with boys. Girls only. Boys rule. Girls drool. Whatever, right? So there is no libido. Your sex drive kind of takes a TO, a timeout, and you are just playing, having fun. You're playing with, kids who are the same sex as you, learning to kind of like become a member of our society and, get along with other members of your same sex, right? Boys play with boys, girls play with girls. No fixations or problems. The last stage is where you are from high school on, right? And this is the genital stage. And again, the libido is in your genitals, but this time instead of trying to figure out who you are as a boy or a girl, it's developing a mature relationship. And you can't really get stuck here because what happens is any issue you have in developing a mature relationship with a male or a female is a result of some problem earlier in your life, right? So the fixations from oral, anal, phallic show up in the genital stage. Now, of course, the neofreudians are Freud's descendants and dissenters. So they're either students of him or people who agreed with part of what he was saying, but not really all of it, okay? Because, I know, right, Freud's ideas kind of seem a little bit crazy, even though there is a little bit of truth to some of the things he talks about, and we can talk more about that in class tomorrow. So they disagree with Freud on three things, right? They do not agree that behavior was motivated by sexual urges, which is a big thing for Freud. All right, the sex and kids thing, like the little kids were sexual, really freaked people out. So it was a hard idea to kind of grasp. They did not agree that personality was determined by like early childhood, age 6, or even by teenagers, 12 or 13. And they did not hold the pessimistic view that he did, which is that we're all controlled by our id and the sexual aggressive drive. Okay, so Freud differs from, or Carl Jung, that's this guy over here, he differs from Freud on a couple of things, right? He believes that an internal energy exists to help you develop, and that energy is actually your ego, right? But he doesn't look at the ego in the same way that Freud does. He doesn't see it as more of a compromise. He kind of sees it as like something that works along with your unconscious simultaneously. And you don't really need to know that, but what you do need to know is that he developed that he believed that personality developed over your lifespan, and that people had like different degrees of traits. Like they were either introverted or extroverted or somewhere in the middle, right? So they're like kind of to be alone and are more quiet, or they like to be in groups and they're outgoing, or they're thinking and feeling. So they use their head or their heart. And these things, so you could be introverted feeling or introverted thinking, extrovert, there's combinations of these, and these are not the only two that combine to make a personality, okay? He did believe in a personal unconscious, okay? So these are experiences that were conscious at one time but are repressed or forgotten, very similar to Freud's unconscious. But he believed that the personal unconscious worked alongside of the ego to have this energy that helped you develop, all right? But what's really interesting about Carl Jung is that he believed in a collective unconscious, which is like a warehouse of memories from our past as a human race that all of us are born already knowing, okay? And these things are called archetypes. They're like ideas or concepts that all humans are born knowing. And the way that he proves this is he looks at like images and stories in cultures and shows that all cultures have similar concepts, images, patterns, no matter what time period in history they are. So either in art, movies, writings, whatever, right? So an example of this was, the first one is a persona. So this is the idea that like people wear masks and that not everyone shows their true nature, and that people tend to hide different parts of themselves from other people, right? People have secrets. Then he believed that all humans had like an anima and an animus. So if you were a male, you had an anima, which was like your female side. And if you're a female, you have an animus, which is your male side, right? So the anima is the feminine side of males. And it's usually represented in like a story or a movie as like a young girl, an earth mother, or a witch. And the animus is the male side of females. And sometimes it's represented by the old wise male or man in the story, okay? But not always. An example I would like to think is like, and I'm going to use the example of like, okay, Star Wars. So Princess Leia is like the anima because she's the twin, right? And then the animus would be, I don't know, Obi-Wan Kenobi, or what's his name? The guy with the weird ears. Why can't I think of his name? Anyways, you know who I'm talking about. He talks backwards. Whatever. We'll talk about it tomorrow. It's escaping me. Then you have the shadow or the villain, which is like the dark side of yourself, or like the villain, the person that opposes the hero, right, which is the one everyone saves the day. So an example of the shadow might be like in the movie Black Swan, like the good and the bad, or the villain, which would be like Darth Vader, right, in Star Wars. The hero is obviously Luke Skywalker. The mother is shown in a lot of things as like the nurturing relationship. So this can either be shown as a real mother or like a surrogate mother. So an example might be in like Cinderella, the fairy godmother, someone that's like nurturing to the hero or the heroine. All right. So these are not the only archetypes. These are just some of the more common ones. If you can think of a movie or a fairy tale, you can probably find some connection to some of these or other ones. There's like the trickster, right? Another big one is the self. So it's an idea of like who you are and what you can do, and what parts of you like and don't like. It's like what you say. All right, so Karen Horne, right? Remember, not horny, but we use the word horny because she talks a lot about love. So she focuses a lot on Freud's views of women. She does not believe that women have penis envy, that women are submissive and dependent. She really focused on the culture and the societal factors that play upon women and men to help develop their personality. And she doesn't really believe about the sex, like I already talked about the sexual conflict. She focuses a lot on parent-child, like Freud did, but not on the parent-child sexuality issue, okay? So she believed that women or men have womb envy, which is that women don't actually envy men's penis, but they do envy their superior status. But men are upset because they can't actually ever bear children, so that's why they try to compensate and become superior to women. And then she also believed that people have basic anxiety that's developed from not receiving enough love to help you feel like confident, and you have a lot of feelings of helplessness. So when you don't get enough love, you develop into three kinds of people. You develop someone who moves towards someone, so you're like needy. You move away from people, you tend to be a loner, or you move against them where you're very competitive and kind of bossy. And that people need, they have a healthy like anxiety love, and so they don't, they're like a balance between these things. All right. Alfred Adler is the last neofreudian you need to know. He believed that the basic human motive is power, not sex, right? And that humans tend to feel weak, and that power causes us to feel a need for superiority, right? And so he believed that humans strive for superiority. They're always improving themselves, they're trying to master challenges, they're trying to be perfectionists, reach their full goals. It's a little, connection there to humanism, and that humans feel inferior and try to compensate. So either they undercompensate, which means that they don't try because they know they can't do it, they're inferior, or they overcompensate, they think they're better than everyone else, so they're superior, or they're in the middle and they're balanced, okay? So that's his main idea, the inferiority-superiority complex, right?